Hotel. Welcome to Journey in the Self. I'm your host, Sarah. Today, it came to me to do a show on managing our emotions, anxiety and depression. How can we do that? And I thought that this was a timely period to do that show because I have been observing a number of people going through emotional challenges, going through depression for various reasons. I've communicated with people on my job. I've seen people post about depression on various social media. I've seen athletes go through their own bouts of depression. And indeed, this is a difficult time for people because of the current circumstances that we live under. Many people are feeling isolated as a result of the requirements that have been imposed upon us during this pandemic, the restrictions that have been imposed. People have been forced to quote unquote social distance, and depending upon how people have adhered to these guidelines, they found themselves increasingly isolated, had limited social contact with people. There's a biological response to having interaction with people, particularly with people in a loving manner. And so people have been deprived of that. People who may be single and don't want to be find themselves in a precarious situation in not being able to have the opportunity to meet people, to go out and interact with people. Communicating and meeting over social media or the internet is not the same as face-to-face and physical contact. Texting does not replace being able to talk to someone in person and to be able to see them and touch them. So then also, depending upon how we process things, how we look at things, the way we allow our mind to wander, then it's very easy to fall into despair or depression. The social environment contributes to that, certainly, particularly for those people who watch the news. News is designed to keep people in a state of anxiety, particularly now with the pandemic going on and all the fear mongering. But the news is negative anyway. It's just been increasingly so. It's not a coincidence that news, which is primarily negative, comes on first thing in the morning to put you in a bad mood, and late at night before you go to bed, so you go to bed in a bad mood. And that's why I continually encourage people to do meditation, and you'll hear me talk about that again today. But before we get into all that, I would be remiss if I did not spend some time making an observation and sharing some comments and information about what's going on currently with regard to the pandemic and the vaccine. And to be honest with you, I don't always want to do this because it is kind of a bit of a downer, if you allow yourself to go there. But it's important to me for people to be informed. It's important for me to be informed. We all have the right to make our choices, and it's important that we have a choice. And my goal is to assist people in having good information upon which to make a choice. So, with that, for those of you who may know me, you know that I played baseball all my life. I have always been an athlete. I still consider myself to be an athlete. As a result, I do appreciate watching sports and following sports. This is one of the best time in sports because all three of the major sports that are important to me are in season right now. Baseball, basketball season's about to start. We have the baseball playoffs, and we're in the beginning of the football season. One of the stories, and a number of stories that are similar, has been about the desire or lack thereof of some athletes to be vaccinated. They've faced intense pressure to become vaccinated. The leagues have imposed very stringent requirements that almost makes it impossible for them to choose otherwise if they have some reservations about taking the vaccine. They're being publicly shamed if they even expressed any reservations. Reservations are reasonable, given the fact that these vaccines have not existed and have not been observed over a long period of time. They were developed very quickly, and the long-term effects of these vaccines have not been able to be evaluated because of the short period of time of their existence. One of the basketball players who has been holding out while he has expressed reservations about the vaccine and had been undecided about taking it, but had clear reservations about it because of the very facts that I just cited, that they haven't been in existence for very long. They haven't gone through a lot of testing, despite what the corporate media has to say about it. And certainly it's been impossible for long-term effects to be evaluated because, again, they have not existed for sufficient time for long-term effects to be evaluated. And he's gone and been subjected to a significant amount of public shaming, and that has come to its head today where, and this player is the center forward for the Golden State Warriors, Andrew Wiggins. He finally capitulated and agreed to be vaccinated so that he would be able to play in the Warriors' home games, because the city of San Francisco, where they play their home games, has issued a mandatory vaccination mandate. So had he not agreed to take it, he would not have been able to play home games, and also would have been subjected to some financial sacrifices as a result. So I will one of the callers pointed out, he says, I wonder if the term injections is better than the word vaccines. And actually, and that was Brother Raj, and he indeed has a point, because technically the so-called vaccines don't actually qualify as vaccines based upon that definition. So he said, he suggested that injection might be a better word, and I would agree with the brother. So Andrew Wiggins has finally capitulated and agreed to be injected, but he's not happy about that decision. And he spoke about his displeasure with it. He said, I felt that the only option was to get vaccinated or not play in the NBA. It was a tough decision. It was a tough decision because that's what he does for his livelihood. He goes on to say, the fact that he'd be forced to miss games is what convinced him to get the vaccine. His concerns, he said, stemmed from the unknown of what the long-term effects of the vaccines are. He's also added that he has had bad reactions to certain medicine in the past, which added a fear factor for him, which I consider to be appropriate. He also pointed out that no one else in his family is vaccinated. He also said that he has had COVID before and that his experience with it wasn't too bad, but that he's worried about potential gene damage and more. But he feels as though he, for all intents and purposes, didn't have a choice. If he wanted to, I mean, certainly he had a choice, but he did not have a choice if he wanted to continue to play in the NBA. We've also seen Cam Newton take a similar stance, and Cam Newton is not playing in the NFL. The article goes on to say, to make its disclaimers, as you would expect that they would after an athlete has expressed those reservations. They say it's gone through extensive testing, serious side effects remain incredibly rare, blah, blah, blah. So we take issue, of course, with those conclusions. And I will read to you some information that Brother Jamal graciously passed on to me. This is from the publication and website Natural News, who reports that there are far more people dying from the vaccines or injections than authorities are admitting. A new scientific report explains that there are now millions of people all around the world who have either died or become seriously and permanently injured or disabled from the jabs with no end in sight. As of August 28, 2021, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, also known as VAERS, has logged more than 16,000 deaths and more than 450,000 adverse events caused by the injections. And I'm sure that you have not heard these statistics on your corporate media. You haven't heard this on CNN or any of the major news networks. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention fraud expert says that the true figures for each of these categories is at least 5 times higher. This means that well over 80,000 people may have died and more than 2.25 million people have suffered an injury from the injection. It's also said that about 150,000 reports of injuries and deaths have been scrubbed from the VAERS system in recent days. So when you add to that, you quickly approach 2.5 million adverse events, including death, caused by the injections. I'll point out, as I did in a prior show, that when it has come to identifying and classifying people who have died from COVID-19 itself, the record keeping has been very liberal in its identification of COVID-related deaths, including people who have died in car accidents, cancer, or any other different causes as being COVID related. And they have, in many hospitals, have economic incentives to induce people, doctors and nurses, to report them thusly. Conversely, they've been very reluctant to report and identify deaths as caused by the injections, even if the death occurs the same day, the next day, the same week, or 2 weeks away. So it's very likely that the number of deaths and adverse reactions is underreported. The article goes on to say another factor to consider is that if a vaccinated person dies within 2 weeks of injection, that death is not logged into the system as a vaccine-related death. Only those deaths that occur after 14 days are categorized as vaccine deaths. So as I just pointed out, if they die the next day, they're not reported as a vaccine death. So this supports what I just said about the underreporting. It says we also know that the true number of incidents involving anaphylaxis, allergic reaction, and that's an allergic reaction which basically constricts the ability to breathe. That reaction is up to 120 times higher than what the CDC reports. It points out that the status quo disincentivizes honest reporting of vaccine injuries to the VAERS system. In just 3 months' time, giant Moderna reportedly received 300,000 reports of adverse events. However, only 1% of these and all others from the vaccine industry are ever reported to the public. Part of the reason for this is that very few people even know that VAERS exists, let alone how to use it. Also, many physicians fail to report their cases to VAERS. meaning that the database only provides a small sliver of the true figures. As we saw in the article I was reading you from about Andrew Wiggins, you see that information is being censored and spinned in such a way. As I read Andrew Wiggins' comments, then immediately following was the claim or disclaimer that adverse events are rare, reactions are rare, deaths are rare. But we just went through some data to establish that that's not the case. And so they're shaming people and causing people to have some confusion about where their health problems are stemming from. As a matter of fact, I have a close personal friend who recently took the vaccination. Actually, I have a couple of them, but one in particular, she has reported that she has had pretty severe menstrual issues for 2 weeks. So the article goes on to say the shaming and blaming of medical professionals, and this is important as well to understand, and this contributes to the underreporting. The shaming and blaming of medical professionals who say anything against the vaccines causes many in the medical community to avoid reporting adverse events. The fear of being held accountable after administering an injection that killed or disabled patients further prevents medical personnel to report it. So if a doctor or a medical professional observes an adverse reaction, not only do the victims not report it because they don't know how to do so, they're medical professionals, even if they are approached by their patients and they express that they've had an adverse reaction, they're reluctant to report it. The article says another thing to keep in mind is the fact that many medical professionals accept bribes in exchange for not reporting vaccine injuries and deaths. The more inconvenient data that is kept out of the system, the bigger the medical industry looks to the public eye. Now skip forward, it says you have 250,000 plus Facebook users who have commented about vaccine deaths and serious injuries. I've seen people on Twitter report. In fact, there's a Twitter group of people who have reported their own adverse reactions and share their stories and share the ostracization that they've gone through, public shaming that they've experienced. And then you have nurses and doctors testifying how their hospitals are hiding vaccine injuries. I want to play something real brief to, I guess, provide a bit more information about what's contained in the vaccines and explain part of the reason why people are having such adverse reactions. We talked before about some of the content where we read the information from the Moderna website. We also talked about Dr. Charles Lieber and his role, and that his expertise is in nanotechnology If you recall, he was arrested for trying to smuggle some information from China. He and another Chinese national. And he has some connection with the Wuhan lab that we discussed before. Okay, so remember this Dr. Charles Lieber who was arrested, and we haven't heard anything about him since then. His expertise was in nanotechnology. Okay, so let's listen here to this clip from the Stu Peters show where he is interviewing a doctor named Dr. Jane Ruby. So let's listen to this clip.
Approval was set up as a furtherance of lies for the CNN propaganda machine. Maybe it's because you're not supposed to know. One doctor, an apparent expert in the field of microscopy, says that he's examined these shots, and if what he's saying is accurate, we now definitively know why it's a big secret. Dr. Jane Ruby is an expert pharmaceutical researcher and a Stu Peters Show contributor. She joins us now.
Stu, it's another bombshell. Look, I've reported on several experts' examinations of the COVID-19 vaccine contents, and the reason this is such a hot topic is because these companies have failed over and over again to reveal everything that's in them. In the first revelation, we saw from La Quinta Columna, remember, they showed visual evidence of the toxic graphene oxide. And since then, we've had reports from foreign matter, like metals, and we've seen visually damaged red blood cells from the UK, from Germany, and now we have a stunning set of results from an expert in microscopy, Dr. Robert Young, who has advised that he has examined the contents, multiple vials of the contents from all four companies. That would be Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, and AstraZeneca. Now, for those people who are interested in the technology of this kind of thing, this doctor was very, very thorough. He used a regular microscope, which you would call optical microscopy. He used bright field and phase, pH phase contrast microscopy, dark field, which we have shown evidence of other from other doctors here on the show. He used UV absorbance and fluorescence spectroscopy. He used a number of different electron microscopes, not just one, but different types of them, believe it or not. And he also used nuclear magnetic resonance, like MRI type approach to this. What Dr. Young did also was he used validated testing, and he followed the manufacturer's instructions for preparing single doses to get ready for these analyses. And he lays out on his website, which I will provide to you so you can attach it to this interview on your website. He lays out in detail the methodology, and he says specifically so that others can replicate it. That's a good scientist. Now, here we're going to start with, I've provided you with some photos that we've got to go over. Really critical. Let's take a look at photo one, because photo one represents, according to Dr. Young, his analysis on the Pfizer vials that he looked at. He verified the presence in multiple vials of graphene oxide, but Stu, one of the shocking things he was able to prove, and you'll see them in a subsequent picture, is parasites and numerous different types of metals. I'm not talking about like tiny little amounts, but aggregates of different types of metals. Photo one as our first photo shows Pfizer's lipid nanoparticle that we've talked about so many times. These two little white dots are there at the nano level. Remember, you could never see this with the naked eye. Two of the lipid nanoparticle transporters that are carrying the mRNA. It's truly science fiction and very chilling. We're going to look now at photo two. This is also from the Pfizer vial. And what you're seeing here in photo two is a cluster of graphene oxide. Again, still at the nano level of microscopy. Now, we're going to move on to the Vagina Vaccine. With Dr. Robert Young, what he found was that it was a conglomeration of a carbon-based reduced graphene oxide substrate. And he said that a lot of the nanoparticles were embedded in that. And that aligns with what we've heard about before in terms of the technology with chemicell cells. Remember that is embedded into a graphene sheet. And so he also said that those nanoparticles were composed of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, aluminum, copper, iron, and chlorine. You may say, well, some of those elements are, they're pretty basic, and we know we already have some of those in our systems. We don't know what the combination in a metallic, composition means chemically for our bodies. Moving on, photo 3 is, again, another Moderna vaccine analysis. And what he's showing here is the metal debris in the material. This is the material. After being diluted properly for a single dose injection into a human being, this is what is in there. Now, I want to show you photo 4 is probably one of the most stunning, and there are several of these on his website. Photo 4 shows a single parasite in the Pfizer material. This was incredibly shocking to me. I've discussed it with some of the America's Frontline Doctors. These photos of parasites in this material, there is no therapeutic use for injecting people with parasites.
What is the use for injecting somebody with a parasite?
I don't believe there is any. And in fact, Dr. Young was able to identify in the Pfizer material the type of parasite. I'll let him, hopefully he'll be on your show soon, I'll let him talk about the names and the types of parasites. But the one that he cited in this particular picture is something that is lethal to humans. Now, I don't know if that's varying depending on the amount of the parasites, what it's injected in, how often it's injected. We're going to have to go to him for that more specific information. So moving on to photo 5, I wanted to show you from his report that these particles you're seeing in photo 5 are composed of stainless steel. This is his findings, stainless steel, and that are glued together. This is quote, Stu, stainless steel glued together with a carbon-based glue of reduced graphene oxide. And this one is from the J&J vial specifically. And he goes on to say, this aggregate is highly magnetic and can trigger pathological blood coagulation, right? These are not disclosed anywhere. I don't even know if all of this is disclosed in the patents that Karen Kingston was able to review and show on your show. But the bottom line, Stu, is that there's countless foreign bodies in these vials, and in all of these vials, in multiple vials from all 4 companies. And Dr. Young tells us that he is bringing his findings forward. This is all new. It's groundbreaking. And I also have other sources that tell me there are countless doctors right now that have contacted certain attorneys and attorney groups. And this is going to be replicated and corroborated over and over again.
So definitively he is saying, Dr. Young, yep, graphene oxide is in here. Okay, so now this is like multiple times that experts, microscopy, doctors, examiners, scientists have said, yes, graphene oxide is in here. Okay, now we're finding a parasite, a lethal parasite, all kinds of different metals, including stainless steel, glued to other things. I mean, this sounds like an intentionally manufactured cocktail of lethal ingredients being injected forcefully into people in certain places, coerced in other places, people losing their jobs if they don't get this thing, and they want to lower the age group to 5 years old to inject as many kids with this thing as possible. In Australia, led 24,000 people, kids, unaccompanied by parents or adults, into a former sports arena, now turned into the modern-day ovens, to inject these kids, multiple of which we have unconfirmed reports are dead. Parents are coming forward. People are really upset about this, understandably. Would you suspect that there would be any medical reason, any justifiable medical benefit to a cocktail made up of these ingredients?
No. In my medical opinion, I can't see any therapeutic use for it. And what's worse, Stu, is that in addition to that, you have no informed consent. If a human being wants to inject themselves with stainless steel, I mean, ultimately that's their right to do that.
Yeah, by all means. Hey, you want some parasites? You want some graphene? Come on over. That's what's in here. If you want it, just got to let you know that is what you are sitting down, rolling up your sleeve for, and having injected into your body.
There's no disclosure. There's no informed consent consideration provided to the people that are being forced to take this to save their
Their
lives?
consideration means nothing anymore. They're not even a part of considering, in many cases, whether or not they are given the choice to take this. They are just being told, take it or be out of a job. Take it or be court-martialed in the military. Go to jail. Go to the brig if you don't take this thing. That is insane. And there are reports that people are, speculating that forced injections are coming. Track you down, find some technology to find you, know whether or not you've been injected. And with those ingredients that you're mentioning, graphene oxide, metals, stainless steel, parasites, for crying out loud, it would be really easy to run somebody through a scanner to determine whether or not they have been inoculated. There will be no fake ID here, no fake passports. Horrific stuff. Tremendous findings. Thank you for bringing it to us. Dr. Jane Ruby, we appreciate you being here.
You bet. Thank you.
So there we have it from Dr. Jane Ruby, who explained the analysis that was done by some scientists who engaged in a number of different techniques to evaluate what the contents are of those vaccines. And she reported what they found, which collaborates information that we've discussed on prior shows, and provides even additional information about the contents. And I wasn't even aware of the fact that the graphene oxide was also included in the Johnson & Johnson vaccines, although the difference between Johnson & Johnson and the Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines are that Johnson & Johnson is not mRNA-based vaccine. So again, as I pointed out on the post that I made earlier today, people have the right to make their choices. But you want to have the opportunity to be informed, make an informed decision. Some people don't want to know, and that's their choice as well. But I choose to want to give people information so that they can make an informed choice. There's more that I could discuss on that. I have more information and more videos. We'll save that for another time. I don't want this whole show to be about that because that's not what I said as my topic. So we'll leave that and we'll follow up on that topic on another day. So now that we're all now thoroughly depressed from that information, we'll discuss how we can manage our emotional state and avoid depression or come out of depression if we find ourselves in that state. Over the past few weeks, my spiritual reading, my listening to discourses from spiritual masters and teachers, and even the posts that I have recently shared on Facebook all have a common theme. And the theme that all of those things have in common is the importance of maintaining awareness of oneself. Indeed, maintaining awareness is one of the principal tenets of spirituality. It's even discussed in the Bible, despite whatever people's thoughts about the Bible are. We know that it's been manipulated, but we also know that if one has a discerning mind, that there are still some jewels, spiritual principles and truths that are contained in the Bible. I think it's ignorant to just completely disavow it, because there are some things that we know aren't true, when there are a lot of things that are still in there that are true. So you take what you can use and take that which you know to be true and that resonates, and use that and discard the rest, rather than throwing it all out. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as you say. But one of those scriptures is to be in the world, but not of it. And what that scripture is referring to is to have a perspective of being an observer as we experience life, such that we don't get caught up in the daily drama that unfolds, but rather we participate in it while observing it from a detached perspective. So we're observing life as we experience it, and we're observing ourselves. We're maintaining awareness about our state of being, maintaining awareness of our thoughts, maintaining awareness of our emotions, our physiology, how we're carrying ourselves, what type of expression that we have on our face, our actions. But one of the most important things that we should maintain awareness of on a continuous basis is being aware and mindful of what we're thinking about in the present moment. What are we thinking about now? And it's important that we engage in discernment about what we're thinking in the present moment. That we make choices about what we're thinking. That we be in control of our thoughts. Because if we're not in control of our thoughts will control us. And I can give you a personal example of how that works. So if we find ourselves in a negative emotional state, and before I go on to share a personal story, I'll go on to say that our thoughts our emotions are directly tied to what we're thinking at any given moment. If we're having positive, happy thoughts, we will be in a positive and happy emotional state. If we're thinking negative, sad thoughts, we'll find ourselves in a negative mood. We'll find ourselves in a emotional state that correlates to the nature of our thoughts. So if we're thinking negative thoughts, we'll be in a negative emotional state. If we're thinking positive thoughts, we'll be in a positive emotional state. So once we notice ourselves, and if we notice ourselves in a negative emotion, then it's important for us to go back and stop ourselves and ask ourselves a question. What are we thinking about? We don't have to try to determine why we're thinking it. It's irrelevant. We can just detach from that thought and let it go. It does not belong to us. Often, I make the analogy that imagine that we're going through a grocery store and we've made a vow to only purchase organic, nutritious foods and avoid sugary foods or foods that are filled with artificial ingredients. And so we'll start driving our cart into the natural food section or organic section and pick up some of those foods. But then we lapse in awareness. We forget our vow, and next thing you know, we're down the cookie aisle putting in Chips Ahoy, Oreo cookies, Doritos, and the like. Cola. Those things have seeped their way into our shopping cart. But they don't belong to us. They're in our cart. They don't belong to us yet. They don't belong to us. Because we haven't yet gone to the checkout stand. And even once we get to the checkout stand, it still doesn't, none of those things belong to us until we pay for them. We can always put them back. So, in the same way that we can remove things that we've put into our shopping cart, we can remove things that we've put into the shopping cart of our minds. We can just put them back and not have any emotions about it at all. We don't have to analyze why those thoughts came. We can just let go and put them back on the shelf where they came from. It may sound, you may say to me, Sarah, that's easier said than done. Everything in life is easier said than done when we first start. But the more we exercise doing so, the more proficient that we become at it. But we first have to start. So now to the personal story. Because I don't tell anybody to do or suggest that anybody do anything that I don't do or am not working on doing. And, you know, that's not to say that I'm perfect and I've mastered any of those things, but I do them. And I do apply them to my life. And they have had a positive effect on my life. So, on my job, until the pandemic started, I traveled quite a bit. In fact, I was traveling more than probably 75 to 85% of the time. I was hardly ever home. And after long trips, I would come home. I'm single. I don't live with anyone. So I would come home to an empty house, Often I'd come home late in the evening, it would be dark. I come home, open the door, and I fall into a lack of awareness, and negative thoughts would start seeping into my mind. And I would get the thoughts coming to me saying, look at you, Sarah. You're coming home to an empty house. There's no one here to greet you. No one has prepared food for you to eat after this long trip. Comfort you, ask you how your trip was. Then I would start getting I'd even have a soundtrack to go along with those thoughts. I'd hear Luther Vandross singing "The House Is Not a Home" in my mind. And then that would start inevitably sending me into sadness and depression, and I'd start that cycle. And in the past, I would go there and I would end up being depressed by allowing that thought cycle to continue. Next thing you know, I'm depressed and sad. But I got to the point with my expanding awareness that I caught myself and I didn't allow that train of thought to continue. So I noticed it and I was like, stop. No, I'm not going there. I changed my perspective. I changed my thoughts. I turned the channel like I had a remote control in my hand. I changed to a positive channel. I changed my perspective and I started saying to myself, no, I'm coming home to a peaceful house. No one's here to disturb me. No one's demanding my attention or complaining about not getting my attention. I can eat what I want to eat. I can listen to whatever music I want to listen to. I can grab my bass and play it. I have peace. I'm happy. So my emotional state changed as I changed my perspective. And my perspective changed as I changed my thoughts. So when I say these things to you, I'm not saying it from me just sitting there reading some books or listening to some spiritual talks and parroting it to you. I'm relating it to you because that has helped me and deal with my own emotional state. But I was able to do that because of the fact that I have been able to develop a more consistent level of awareness. That's not to say that I'm in 100% awareness all the time. There are times when I'll slip, but I'll catch myself a lot quicker than I used to. And I don't allow myself to go down a negative emotional spiral because I do have awareness, and when I have a lapse, I'll catch it. And over time, as we develop in our awareness, the time that it takes for us to notice it will begin to dissipate to where we're able to censor ourselves in real time. And so then next question you ask, well, Brother Sarah, how do you get to that state? What do you do in order to be able to develop the capacity to be in awareness? Well, as I said at the outset, I always encourage us to maintain a regular practice of meditation. I tell everyone that who I counsel. If anyone's dealing with stress, depression, sadness, or any other negative emotion, the first thing that I'll recommend or ask people is if they meditate. And if they don't, then I will encourage them to do so. Why? We talked about that before, but I'll say it again until people get it. So I'm going to keep repeating it because I know that people aren't doing it. Which is something that, I got from my spiritual teacher, Abba. So the reason I encourage meditation is because in the process of meditation, our objective is to observe our thoughts and detach from our thoughts. And when I say detach, it means to withdraw our energy from the thoughts, to not identify with those thoughts, to look at the thoughts as from the perspective that they do not belong to me. Just as I gave the allegory of shopping in the grocery store. They don't belong to us until we pay for them. In this context, paying for them is when we give energy to it and when we accept them as being ours. So in the process of meditation, we're withdrawing our energy. We're not spending any money on purchasing. We're just observing. They don't belong to us. They don't mean anything to us. And so meditation is just observing the thoughts as they come, not trying to control them. Because if we try to control them, we're giving energy to them. And when we give energy to them, we're accepting ownership. We're drawing them to us. And that's why many people struggle with meditating, because they're actively trying to expend energy to stop thoughts from coming. But in the process of doing so, they're attracting more thoughts to them. And so then they get frustrated because they can't stop thinking. It's not our objective to try to stop thinking. Our objective is to detach, to withdraw our energy from it. And so as we do that, we develop the ability to maintain awareness of ourselves, because thoughts are going to come. We don't have any control of that because the thoughts do not belong to us. Thoughts just exist in the ether. They're floating around in the atmosphere. And they will come in and out of our consciousness. But it's us who chooses whether they stay there or not. Or if they just pass. So by maintaining observation of ourselves, we will notice when a thought comes into and stays in our consciousness, because we'll start noticing ourselves basically feeding that thought seed. We'll notice ourselves thinking about something and not being in meditation any longer. We're now started on some train of thought. and we become distracted by it, and to the extent that we continue to allow it, then our emotional state starts to change. But while we're meditating, we'll notice it, and then we'll withdraw our energy and let it go. As we continue to do that through our regular practice of meditation, we will come to the realization that this skill that we have developed through meditation, we can apply it to our life. So when we go back to the story I told about me coming home, that process was like a waking meditation for me, because I brought myself into awareness of what I was thinking when I noticed myself starting to get drawn into a negative emotional state, when I started noticing myself getting depressed. I brought myself back to, what am I thinking about, Sarah? What are those thoughts going on there? And I noticed those thoughts. And I stopped. Like, nope, I let go. I let them go. And then I chose thoughts that made me feel better. Okay, so just we were talking about the earlier topic, choice is important. And we certainly have the choice over what's going on in our mind. We just don't typically exercise it. So managing our emotional state from a technical standpoint, if you will, is a relatively simple process in theory. The challenge is being able to execute it, but the challenge can be overcome through practice. The only thing that makes it difficult for us is that we have not been practicing that. We're not accustomed to that. We're accustomed to allowing thoughts to come in and out of our consciousness without exercising any degree of control, in such a way that as thoughts come, so go our emotions. And we're not exercising any control over that, so they're controlling us. And as I pointed out, that is increasingly important today because of the environment that we're living in, because we're continuously bombarded with negativity. We're continuously bombarded with negative messages coming through the television media, from the music that we listen to, from social media. There's an article about how Facebook is manipulating people and driving people to certain actions. Many people spend a lot of time on social media, and we're being influenced that way. If you listen to a lot of people talk these days, you see that a lot of people really don't have their own opinions. They're just repeating what they've been programmed based upon what form of media that they're into and the nature of the content that they gravitate to. People aren't thinking for themselves. People are being programmed to think externally. And so it's important that we be in a heightened state of awareness, particularly during these times, so that we can be in control, lest we be controlled. It's already a battle for us to be able to maintain control over ourselves without any external stimulation or influence. Because we're going through an internal battle between our higher self and our lower self. And so, to the extent that our lower self can influence us into negative thinking, then it will be able to maintain our control and impede our ascension into our higher self. But that's not all we have to deal with now. Because everything, all the external influences are compounding that battle and making it more difficult. So we're not facing just the internal battle, but we're facing an external battle to not only distract us, but to control us and to send our emotions, our thoughts into a certain level of vibration, which will then influence our emotions and then influence our actions. You know, as George Clinton says in the Funkadelic song, "Good thoughts, bad thoughts. Be careful of the thought seeds you plant in the garden of your mind, for seeds go after their kind." Every thought felt as true or allowed to be accepted as true in your conscious mind take root in your subconscious, blossoming sooner or later into an act, and bears its own fruit. So whatever we're thinking about, we'll end up acting upon that and bearing the fruit of the consequences from karma. That's a deep song. I highly recommend that you get it and listen to it. That's the song "Good Thoughts, Bad Thoughts" by Funkadelic on the Let's Take It to the Standing on the Verge of Getting It On album. So that's my funk esoteric knowledge to pass on to you. So I hope that this has been beneficial to you and you can take this information and apply it to help you to know yourself and to be in control of yourself. You know, I'm looking at Brother Jamal's message here on Skype, and it says, "Free your mind," which is what we need to do. Is free our mind and take control of it. You know, lest our mind be controlled. The song's Funkadelic says, "Mind your wants because someone wants your mind." And that is indeed the circumstances that we find ourselves under. So you can take this information and apply it. You know, just apply it. It doesn't help us just to listen. It doesn't help us just to read. You know, it doesn't help us just to be able to talk about the information that we've gained, you know, to to impress people. It's not about that. It's about being able to use the information to gain control over ourselves, to be in observation of ourselves, to know ourselves, to realize what our tendencies are so that we can avoid them. We do that through observation. To be able to make corrections to our path as we fall off the path. Just as it is that an airplane pilot will find himself off course frequently during this trip, but he's also making course corrections throughout the trip. In the same way, we will find ourselves off of our course at times, but I encourage us to not lament over the fact that we've lost our course, because we can always get back on course. But we can only do so if we realize that we're off course. And that's through maintaining a state of awareness, to maintain a awareness of our thoughts, to maintain awareness of our emotional state, because we can change it. We don't have to allow ourselves to fall into depression or sadness. And it's not because of the circumstances. It's the other way around. We will attract the circumstances based upon the nature of our thoughts, our emotions, the words that we speak. And if we allow ourselves to get caught up in a negative emotional thought cycle, if we're experiencing adverse circumstances, we will magnify it based upon the emotions that we're feeling at the time, the thoughts that we're engaging in, and the words that we speak, because they're all vibrations that send our energy into the universe and track to us in like manner. So, again, I encourage people to maintain awareness. Awareness is key. And you develop the ability to be able to develop the discipline to maintain awareness through the regular practice of meditation. If you have any questions about how to do that, feel free to reach out to me. You can contact me through Facebook Messenger. If you're on Facebook, you can also find me on Twitter, though I don't use it often, but I'm there. I'm also on Instagram. You can find me on any of those venues, but just do reach out to me. You send me a message, or even post something on my post, and I'll be happy to talk to you and see how I might be able to be of assistance to you. And also, be mindful of what we're seeding into the garden of our minds, the thought seeds that we plant in the garden of our minds. And so it's important that we be conscious of what we're feeding ourselves. So I encourage people to read positive, uplifting information, to watch programs that inspire and uplift, and that keep you in a positive emotional state. I talked about maintaining, being mindful of our physiology. That's something that I have to concentrate on, because I can tend to be a bit serious, and sometimes a lot of times I might have a serious look on my face, or even you know, and when I'm focused, I might tend to even appear to be angry. So I catch myself a lot of time, um, in having a serious look on my face, or even frowning. But I catch it, and I know that if I continue to have a frown on my face, it's going to end up affecting my emotions. So if I'm not aware, I'll end up being angry and not have any idea why. Right? So be aware of even, our physiology. How are we carrying ourselves? Those things affect our emotional state as well. So it's important to maintain a continuous awareness of oneself. Be aware of your physical state, your physiology. You know, even be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of how you dress. You know, your attitude about things, the words that you speak. Focus on speaking positively. Focus on thinking positively, because all those things contribute to our emotions. So it all comes back to awareness. So uh, read positive books. So I encourage you to. I've written 2 books, and I think the thoughts that I share there are positive and uplifting. So I highly encourage you to go out to get my books. My books are the Book of Light and the Luminous Wisdom, which you can find on Amazon. You just type in Sarah Book of Light, and you'll find it there on Amazon. So again, you can reach out to me if you want me to be of assistance to you. I know I can be of assistance to you, but you have to reach out. So I encourage you to do so if you need help. And I see Brother Jamal's typing something. Dr. J says, what are some spiritually uplifting movies that you would recommend? For me, the first thing that I'm going to say is Star Wars. People often feel that Star Wars is sci-fi, and Brother Sarah, I'm not into sci-fi. You missed the point. Though Star Wars is based in a sci-fi environment, the principal tenets of Star Wars is spirituality. So I recommend watching the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. You can pass on the prequel trilogy. I'm sorry, the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. You can forego that stupid Disney sequel trilogy. So that'll be my first recommendation: the Star Wars prequel and original trilogy. I'd also recommend The Matrix, because The Matrix is a metaphor for our life experience. And maybe, one day I'll talk about that, the symbology of the Matrix. I recommend, there's a movie called, I think it's called Down the Rabbit Hole, which is very insightful and informative on a number of different perspectives. So if that's still available, I highly recommend that. I recommend Awake, about the life of Paramahansa Yogananda. I'm sure you can find that one also on Amazon. So those are movies that immediately come to mind that I think are both entertaining and uplifting at the same time. Yeah. Those are my first recommendations. I'll have to think a little bit more and add to that list, but those will be the 4 movies that I would recommend that we watch. I'm sure I have some other ones here at home. So as I think about those, I'll bring them up. But yeah, watch the Star Wars trilogy, original, and the prequels, The Matrix, particularly the original. But go ahead and watch the trilogy. Yeah, and as I think of it, go ahead and watch the Hobbit movies, and I can talk a little bit about that. There are some spiritual insights that I gained from watching that, and sometimes when I'm teaching, I will invoke some of those scenes to communicate a spiritual point. Yeah, so the Star Wars trilogies, The Matrix, Down the Rabbit Hole, I think that's the title, and the movie Awake, about the life of Paramahansa Yogananda. And then, if you're of African descent, I highly recommend the movie Sankofa. Yeah. So those are my recommendations. All right. So I see we're at the end. So I hope this has been uplifting and informative and useful to you. And I encourage you to put these things into practice. And again, if you need any assistance, do reach out to me on Facebook here. I have to get my website back up. I do also go to Amazon and purchase my books, the Book of Light and Luminous Wisdom. I think you'll find those also beneficial. So with that, thank you for joining us here on Journey into Self, and we'll see you next time. Hotep.